You know, I found myself in a place that I never thought that I would be in. I had always been fit, athletic, into martial arts, just working out, really healthy, had been doing network engineering, operations, all of that, and got in an accident. And in that moment, my whole life changed. It's commonly thought that the reason that the placebo works is because people believe it's going to work. And so I started trying to make myself believe I was already healed. And doing it with full intention, really telling myself I was already healed over and over and over. And that didn't work. And I have to say, it made me feel like I was going a little crazy. Because I wanted to get better so bad that I was really doing everything I could to believe that I was healed. And I felt like there was a part of me that really believed it, and there was a part of me that was really in a lot of pain. And so it didn't work. And further, recent research has actually shown that even open label placebos work. And an open label placebo is where people know that it's a placebo and they can work. And so that didn't work, but it led me down this journey of going, wait a second. I started looking at research going, more than 80% of amputees still experience pain? They can experience phantom pain, or people with multiple personality disorder, or DID, can have different types of ailments or pain when they're in different personalities. And I'm going, wait a second here. Wait a second. Why is this not expanded upon? Why are we not using the mind? If we know that the mind has this type of influence and ability over the body, why is it not anywhere? Especially, looking at our world and seeing that there's so much stress and all of that. And you go, wait, if the mind has this ability, then I need to really figure out how to be able to use it. And so just one level of research led to another. I started looking at just spontaneous remission and everything. Like, the more I looked, the more I found. And eventually I came across this study that was at Oak Ridge, which is basically an energy, energy research center. And I also started looking, at how pain works in the body, because I wanted to be able to just at least get out of some pain. And so I, started smiling to help increase endorphins, because I was like, okay, these are the body's natural painkiller. I want to, start bringing in some endorphins. And I also started looking at, how does pain show up in the body? Because really, pain is all in the mind when we think about it. If you have an injury or you get cut or something like that, the first thing that happens is the nociceptor actually takes aware of it, which is basically a sensory cell, and it sends it to the spinal thalamic pathway, which sends it up to the thalamus in the brain. Okay. Then from there, the thalamus sends it to the sensory area of the brain. So when we look at it, it's the somatosensory cortex, so a part of the brain that relates to senses, basically. Now, what's interesting is in the somatosensory cortex, there are different body parts in different locations. So in other words, to relate pain to the leg is in a different location than the face or the arm. Okay, so I thought it was fascinating that, from the nociceptor up to the ascending pathway to the thalamus to the sensory is how this is going. So what happens is pain is all in the mind eventually. I mean, the way we know of pain or feel pain happens in the mind. Now, something else came to me as I was looking at this is when we stop and look at emotions, they kind of do the same thing. I mean, if we look at somebody being embarrassed, it affects a certain part of the body. Somebody might blush. Okay, compared to an anxiety attack, where somebody's feeling a lot of anxiety, they have racing heart, shortness of breath. Okay, or we look at sexual feelings, create a sexual response in the body. Or we've heard before somebody getting stressed out, it increases their blood pressure. Or maybe somebody feeling like they've got a lot of stress and they have like a lump in their throat, or a lot of fear, a pit in their stomach. And so when we start looking at all of the emotions and realizing that they affect a different part of the body also. And that led me to really exploring emotions and looking at it and going, how much can emotions really affect the physical body? So one of the things that I began to think about when I looked at how pain registered in the mind is that, we also have the descending pathway, which helps to try to inhibit pain. So it'll try to block the pain signal between the nociceptor and the spinal thalamic pathway. So it uses serotonin and noradrenaline to try to basically inhibit the messages, to stop the messaging signal from going up. And so when my focus had been trying to get the pain to stop, that was one thing. And so that was something that I took into account, but I also looked at it and said, I want the pain to do more than just stop. I want my body to heal. And so I was researching, when we really look at the body, we're atoms and molecules. You look at the cells are made of atoms and molecules. And that's when I looked up and I found research from Oak Ridge that basically more than 98% of the atoms in the body were shown to be replaced in a year. Okay? Now I came across this research, and as I did, I was like, well, wait a second here. I've been injured for how many years? Now, if 98% of my atoms in my body have already been replaced, then why is my body recreating a problem? And so when I started to look at it from that frame of reference, it actually gave me even more hope. I was like, okay, well, why is my body recreating it that way? And the crazy thing is we've known this, I think it was since the 1950s, and for whatever reason, in the last few years, that research was taken down. But to me, looking at that gave me this awareness that says, okay, well, how do I get my body to recreate itself different? And that's when I began to look at biophotons, okay? And that's when I began to look at biophotons. Now, biophotons were discovered in 1941 by Alexander Gurvich. And what they are is basically every living organism gives off photons of basically light photons. So biophotons have been very under-researched, but when we start to look at what we do know, or the research that has been done on them, it shows that they're able to communicate. These photons can help cells communicate. And when we start to look at that awareness that biophotons can help cells communicate, not only what message are they giving, but if we think about it, when we break things down below atoms and molecules and we're starting to look at photons, and what's brilliant is this. So if every cell is got these biophotons, and you start to look at the awareness that our minds can actually help influence photons, you start to open up a whole new world of possibility. And in fact, people are always amazed at what I've been able to do with my mind. And so in multiple occasions, I've ended up with electrodes on my head and in labs and all of that. And one lab that I was in, one lab experiment, they had me locked into a padded room in one room, and then in an adjacent room, they had a experiment set up that was a photon beam, which had a photon splitter, and then a photon counter at the end. And so at the end of the photon counter, they could count the amount of photons going into it, right? And in this other padded room where I was, they had it set up to where they would ask me to use my mind for about, I think it was 4 or 5 minutes at a time, to influence the photons in the adjacent room. And then I would stop for a while, and then it would go. So there was like this green light that would come on and say, okay, and this voice, it would say, okay, go. And then this red light and the voice say, okay, stop. And what I did was I would use my mind to influence this. And after, I think, 25 minutes of doing it, they were able to look at the data, and they could see by different counts in the photons that using my mind, I was able to influence the photons coming out of this photon beam from a distance, right? Now, when we look at it, though, what's exciting is biophotons. When we start to look at the awareness that our thoughts can help influence photons, you start to look at our body and you go, okay, what is possible? And that's what's exciting. I mean, to me, what I started doing was I actually started looking at what specific emotions could be impacting my body. And so I guess the easiest way to describe it is we've heard before that, if somebody has a brain injury, or a stroke or whatnot, it can paralyze different parts of the body or speech. It can impair parts of the body. So I started looking at it and going, okay, well, we know that emotions can be stored in the subconscious mind. And we also know that emotions have the ability to affect the body, even to detrimental levels, as we talked about, scared to death or bored to death or widowhood effect and all of these things, failure to thrive, or even on a regular basis in our day-to-day life. And so when I started looking at the fact that emotions can affect the body, we know that, and that emotions can store in the subconscious mind, we know that, I started looking at them and saying, okay, what emotions are stored up in my mind, in my subconscious mind, that are affecting the energy of my body? And because what I looked at is I said, okay, if I'm looking at biophotons, or looking at the awareness of them rather, and going, okay, if we have the ability to influence photons and influence the energy of the body, then I've just got to start changing and shifting my emotions that are influencing my body. How do I shift those? And so that's what I started doing, is I called it my emotion, like, okay, I've got to identify what the emotional injury is, or the culprit emotion, and then shift that. Now, the thing is that a lot of people have emotions that are consistent. So we have neural pathways, and when we start to look at the brain, we have, 100 billion neurons. Some people would say 100 billion, some people, research also has shown 86 billion. Either way, it's a lot. Okay? And so what happens is that these neurons, to communicate, to connect, to send signals back and forth, they create what we call neural pathways. So science has, shown that there's neural pathways that are created, which an easy way to explain it would be to say, if you wanted to go from your house to your sister's house or brother's house or friend's house, there's a certain path you're going to take to get there. Now, if it's the very first time, let's say you live in open country and it's the first time you take that path, then you're creating a new path. But if you start creating it and going that same exact route every day, it starts to broaden the path. And so basically what happens is the habits, our behaviors, any thoughts, emotions that we have on a consistent basis, they start to build our neural pathways, So these connections, these paths, instead of being a little path, it now becomes a freeway. And so our brain gets used to going that way. But our brain is always changing. Science has shown that we, through neural plasticity, that whatever we're experiencing in our day or we're feeling, that it's continuously shaping our mind. And so what I started to look at in my own case was, okay, what specific emotions and emotional patterns do I have going on subconsciously or consciously even, that could be impacting my body? And then I started to look at those and say, okay, now how do I shift those? And that's what changed everything. I began to lift my emotions, which really, when we talk about energy of the body, the happier I was and the more I lifted my emotions, the more energy I have, the better I felt. And because at this time I had felt so fatigued and drained and in pain that everything was exhausting, everything. And so as I lifted myself and my own energy and brought in happier, more positive thinking and feeling, really, I say thinking, but it really has to do with the feelings itself, that's when I really started feeling more energized and better. And then as I felt more energized, it was really about working to get rid of the negative emotions. And as I cleared those, it was incredible. I was able to release my own pain.